The $9 in his pocket were all that stood between Marcus Reed and another night of hunger. The city lights of downtown Manhattan shimmered like broken promises, reflecting off the puddles of rainwater that lined the street. It was almost 10 p.m., and Marcus sat against the frosted glass of a closed bank tower, his breath fogging in the cold air as he unfolded the crumpled bills. $9. His entire day's worth of scavenging cans, fixing discarded electronics and praying that tomorrow might be kinder. $9 meant 3 small meals if he stretched it right. Or one bus ride to nowhere. He had no home, no safety net, only an empty stomach and the weight of a past that still echoed in every heartbeat. But that night, something happened that would not only rewrite Marcus's story, it would ignite a movement that changed medicine, money, and what it truly meant to be human. Across the street, a man in an expensive gray suit stumbled out of an alley. At first, Marcus thought the guy was drunk, another Wall Street ghost after a long day of trading. But then the man collapsed, his body twisting, gasping like the air had betrayed him. People glanced him and looked away. Some walked faster, pretending not to see. Others pulled out phones, recording from a distance, capturing tragedy like entertainment. Marcus froze. He'd seen that look before. The same wide, terrified eyes of someone whose body was shutting down from the inside. He'd seen it in Kandahar when soldiers went into shock on the battlefield, and he'd promised himself, never again would he stand by and do nothing. The man's face was swelling, his lips turning a frightening shade of blue. Marcus knew exactly what was happening, anaphylaxis. The man's airway was closing. Minutes to live, if that. Marcus's stomach cramped from hunger, but the medic in him, the man he used to be, came alive. He had a choice. Spend his last $9 on food, or sprint across the street and buy an EpiPen that cost almost 10 times that amount. It shouldn't have been a question. But when you're starving, when every dollar means survival, the question becomes cruelly complicated. 5 years ago, Marcus Reed wasn't invisible. He wore a Navy uniform with pride, EMT Reed responding to emergency calls across Brooklyn. Before that, he was Sergeant Reed, combat medic, 82nd Airborne, Afghanistan. He'd saved lives under enemy fire, patched bleeding soldiers with trembling hands, and earned medals that no longer mattered. What broke him wasn't war. It was coming home to a country that forgot what he'd given up for it. His wife, Elena, had waited through deployments, raising their son, Caleb, alone. She'd written letters every week, and until the day the hospital called to say she was gone. Cancer, stage 4. He wasn't there to hold her hand. After that, the nightmares began. Loud noises made his heart sprint. Sleep turned to battlefields. The VA told him he needed treatment, but to qualify he needed a permanent address. How do you find an address when the streets are the only home you have? Every day became the same equation: survive or disappear. Wake before sunrise, hide your blanket before the cops sweep, collect bottles until noon. On lucky days, $15. On bad ones, maybe 5. Today was worse than most. At the library, Marcus kept warm among the smell of old paper and dust. He read medical journals, the only reminder that he'd once mattered, that knowledge could outlast poverty. His old EMT handbook, water-damaged and stitched together with tape, was still in his backpack. So were his dog tags. He couldn't pawn those. They were proof that once he'd been somebody. When younger vets asked why he still studied medicine, he'd smile and say, "Because when the world forgets you, knowledge remembers." That evening, walking past the glowing towers of Liberty Street, he overheard 2 businessmen chatting outside a restaurant. "Did you see what Charles Denton is doing? The pharma guy testifying tomorrow about insulin prices? Yeah, the billionaire who sells EpiPens for $850, what a joke." Marcus didn't care. The rich had their games. He just needed a $1 menu burger and maybe a place to sleep dry. He crossed toward a Walgreens, eyeing the price board he'd memorized weeks ago. The generic epinephrine injector, $84.99. He'd thought about that price every time he passed the store. How could a drug that once cost $8 now cost a week's worth of survival? He muttered, $9. That's all I've got. Then the sound came, a wheeze so sharp it sliced through the night. A man was dying. Again. Marcus didn't think. He moved. The man was on the ground, convulsing, clutching his throat. His expensive watch flashed under the streetlight. His briefcase burst open, papers scattering like confetti of panic. People backed away. Someone said, "Don't touch him, you'll get sued." Marcus ignored them. Training took over. He checked the wrist. A bracelet. Severe peanut allergy. Carry EpiPen. But when he searched the man's jacket, the injector was shattered, the medicine leaking uselessly into the gutter. His mind raced. The Walgreens across the street closed at 10. He checked his watch, at 9:43. He had maybe 3 minutes before the man's brain ran out of oxygen. "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" Marcus shouted, no answer. Just phones filming. He stared down at the man's face, blue, gasping, terrified. Then he looked at the $9 in his palm. It wasn't a choice anymore. He whispered, "Hold on, buddy," and ran. He sprinted across the street, dodging cars, pounding pavement like he was back in combat, adrenaline flooding his veins. The doors slid open, too slow, and he slammed his hands on the counter. "I need an epinephrine injector, now." The young pharmacist flinched. "Sir, do you have a prescription?" "It's not for me. A man's dying outside, anaphylactic shock. You can see him from the window." "Sir, please calm. Every second you talk is a second closer to his funeral." She hesitated. The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, store policy," Marcus shouted. "Policy? You want to explain your policy to his wife when he doesn't make it?" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the pharmacist's expression changed. Something in Marcus's voice and that edge of raw authority broke through. She turned, grabbed a box from the shelf, scanned it, and said quietly, "$84.99. Marcus looked at his hand. $9. Not enough, but he wasn't leaving empty-handed. He slammed the money on the counter. "Take it, please. I'll pay the rest later. Just let me save him." The pharmacist stared, torn between conscience and corporate rule. Behind her, the guard whispered, "Don't do it, Maya. You'll get fired." She looked up. "Then I'll get fired for doing the right thing." She shoved the box across the counter. Marcus snatched it and bolted for the door. The next heartbeat would decide two fates. One billionaire, one forgotten veteran. He was about to spend his last $9 not on survival, but on saving a stranger. And he didn't yet know that the man gasping for air was Charles Denton, the most powerful pharmaceutical CEO in America, a man whose company sold life at a price most couldn't afford, and that within 24 hours those $9 would shake the entire world. Marcus tore open the small cardboard box as he ran, the thin paper slicing his thumb. He didn't feel the sting. All he could think about was the sound of that man's breath and or the absence of it. The city blurred around him, headlights and horns screaming as he darted through traffic, clutching the injector like a lifeline. When he reached the sidewalk, the crowd had grown larger. The man in the suit was lying motionless now, his skin pale and cold. Someone whispered, "He's gone." Another muttered, "Just leave it. Ambulance is on the way." Marcus dropped to his knees. "Not on my watch," he said. He ripped open the injector cap, orange tip to thigh, blue to sky, and pressed down. Click. The needle fired, and for 10 seconds the world stood still. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. He counted, voice steady despite the tremor in his body. At 7, a woman started crying. At 9, the man jerked, sucking in a harsh, ragged breath. By 10, his chest began to rise and fall again, faint but real. The crowd gasped. Phones stopped recording. Silence swallowed the street. Marcus leaned close, whispering, "You're okay. Breathe. Stay with me." The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and confused. Then his hand twitched, weakly grabbing Marcus's sleeve before slipping away into unconsciousness again. Sirens echoed down the street. Marcus backed away as paramedics rushed in. He recognized one of them. Alvarez, a rookie he'd trained years ago. Their eyes met. "Reed?" Alvarez said, stunned. You did this?" Marcus nodded once. "Severe anaphylaxis. Injector at 9:47. Monitor for biphasic reaction." His voice was calm, the professional tone he hadn't used in years. "Jesus," Alvarez muttered. "You just saved his life." Marcus turned away. Just did what anyone should. He walked off before the questions could start, disappearing into the river of people. Behind him, flashing red lights painted the buildings like fire. He didn't know that by morning. The whole country would be talking about him. He didn't know that cameras had captured the entire scene. The sprint, the desperation, the $9 exchange. And he didn't know that the man gasping for air would wake up and say his name on national television. Hours later, Marcus sat beneath an overpass, his stomach twisting with hunger and adrenaline. He still smelled the sharp tang of adrenaline and plastic from the injector. The rain had started again, thin, cold needles falling through the gaps in the concrete. He stared at the single penny change the pharmacist had dropped into his hand. It glinted faintly under the streetlight, 1 cent for a miracle. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. His heart wouldn't slow down. He'd saved another life, but he couldn't save himself. At that same hour across the city, Charles Denton lay in a private hospital suite, oxygen mask hissing softly. His assistant hovered nearby, tablet glowing with news headlines. "Sir," she said, "the video's everywhere. People are calling it the $9 miracle." Charles blinked, still weak. "Who was he?" "We're trying to find out." "He didn't give his name. Security footage shows him leaving the scene." Charles struggled to sit up, his voice rough. "Find him. Tonight." "Sir, you need rest. Find him." The assistant hesitated, then nodded. Morning arrived with gray skies and chaos. Every channel, every social feed, every radio station talked about one thing: the homeless veteran who'd saved the billionaire. Commentators argued. Was it staged? Was it luck? Who was the man with the steady hand? Meanwhile, Marcus didn't own a phone. He didn't see the coverage. He only knew that his cardboard shelter under the 2nd Avenue bridge was gone, thrown out by the morning police sweep. He muttered under his breath. Rules, always rules. He walked to the public library, stomach gnawing, fingers numb. A few people stared at him, recognition flickering behind their eyes, but he didn't notice. He sat in the corner and opened his torn EMT handbook, but the words blurred together. His hands shook from exhaustion. In another part of the city, Charles Denton was watching footage frame by frame. The security team had enhanced the video, zoomed in on Marcus's face as he administered the injection. "There," Charles whispered. "Pause, that's him." He stared at the man's worn jacket, the dog tags hanging beneath it. The eyes that looked far older than the face. "Get me his name," he said. "Sir, it might take a while, then start now. And check the VA records. If he's a veteran, I want to know everything." He didn't know yet that the man he was searching for had once saved soldiers in war, and that his company's rules had denied that same man medical care. By afternoon, Marcus sat outside a church soup kitchen, clutching a bowl of watery stew. He wasn't thinking about fame or money. He was thinking about Caleb, the son he hadn't seen in years. He wondered if his boy would even recognize him now. The hollow cheeks, the gray creeping into his beard. The eyes that carried too many ghosts. He whispered to himself. "I did one good thing. Elena, I hope that counts for something." Then a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men in suits stepped out, scanning the crowd. One of them held a photo. The picture was him. "Excuse me," one of them said. "We're looking for Marcus Reed." The crowd stiffened. Marcus stood slowly, wary. "Who's asking?" The man spoke into an earpiece. "We found him." Marcus's first thought wasn't relief. It was fear. "What did I do wrong?" he asked. The man shook his head. "Nothing, sir. Mr. Denton would like to meet you." Marcus blinked. "Who?" "Charles Denton." "The man you saved." He froze. The name hit him like a shockwave. "The billionaire? The pharma giant, that man?" The suit's tone softened. "He says he owes you a debt no money can repay." Marcus laughed once, dry and bitter. "That's good, because I've got no bank account. Please, sir." "He's waiting." The SUV door opened. Charles Denton stepped out, alive, pale, and humbled. His $1,000 suit looked out of place beside Marcus's ragged jacket. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "you saved my life." Marcus shook his head. "I just did what anyone would." Charles looked around at the others nearby, the bystanders, the soup kitchen line, the world that had watched but done nothing. Then why did no one else move? Marcus didn't answer. Charles reached into his coat and pulled out something. Marcus's torn VA appointment card. "I found this near where I fell." "You're a veteran." Marcus's throat tightened. "Used to be." "Not used to be," Charles said softly. "Still are." He glanced down at the card again. The red denied stamp across the word treatment. And that was the moment the billionaire's world began to crack. He turned to his assistant. Call the VA now, sir. Ask them why a decorated medic with a bronze star can't get treatment. The assistant hesitated. They'll cite regulations, sir. Address requirements, insurance. Then tell them to cite it to me. I'll wait. When the line connected, Charles spoke with a cold fire Marcus hadn't heard since combat officers giving orders. Marcus Reed, service number 27489012, denied PTSD treatment for lack of permanent address. Explain that to me. Sir, the VA representative stammered, I'm not authorized to discuss individual cases. You are now. A long pause. Then, policy requires, change the policy, Charles snapped and hung up. He turned back to Marcus. You spent your last $9 to save me. I've spent billions keeping medicine away from people who need it. That ends now. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. What are you talking about? Charles's voice trembled slightly. Tomorrow morning, I'm telling the world the truth. That night, Marcus slept behind a dumpster in the alley beside the church. He didn't believe billionaires. He didn't believe promises. He believed only in what he could touch. And right now, that was hunger and concrete. But at sunrise, the city woke to something new. Every screen lit up with breaking news. Charles Denton, CEO of Denton Pharmaceuticals, was standing behind a podium, cameras flashing. I nearly died 2 nights ago, he said, his voice steady. A stranger saved me. A homeless veteran. A man who had nothing but gave everything. His name is Marcus Reed. Marcus's face filled the screen. The shelter erupted. People pointed, gasped, cheered. Charles continued. He spent his last $9 to buy the drug my company sells for $800. Because of him, starting today, that drug will cost what it should have always cost, $9. And every veteran in this country will receive our medications for free, address or not. The crowd roared. Marcus just sat there, trembling. He had wanted food. He got a revolution, and this was only the beginning. The world erupted overnight. Reporters flooded the streets outside Denton Pharmaceuticals. Protesters and supporters alike carried handmade signs that read 9 saved a life and medicine belongs to humanity. News anchors repeated Marcus's name like a mantra, his face flashing on every screen. Marcus didn't want fame. He just wanted a meal and a place to breathe. But suddenly his life wasn't his own anymore. The city he'd slept beneath now seemed to follow him with cameras instead of police flashlights. Inside a cafe downtown, journalists argued over coffee cups. He's a hero. He's a symbol. He's proof the system is broken. Marcus, watching from a cracked window across the street, whispered to himself, I'm just a man who ran. But the moment he had spent his last $9, the world had decided he was something more. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside the Bridge Street shelter. Veterans, nurses, students, strangers, everyone wanted to meet him. Some offered cash, others food. Some just wanted to shake his hand. Marcus smiled politely, uncomfortable with the attention. Then he heard a voice behind him. Mr. Reed. He turned. It was Charles Denton again, surrounded by aides and cameras but walking toward Marcus alone. No limousine, no guards. Just a man stripped of his armor of wealth. Charles extended his hand. I made promises this morning. I intend to keep them. Marcus looked down at the hand, hesitant. Why me? Because you reminded me who I was before all this, Charles said. Before profit made me forget why I started. They stood there for a moment, the crowd quieting around them. 2 men from opposite worlds connected by one act of courage. I want to help, Charles continued. Not with charity, with partnership. There's something I want you to lead, Marcus frowned. Lead? I can barely lead myself. Charles smiled faintly. You'll see, he gestured to his car. Come with me. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't refuse help. They drove to Denton's headquarters, a tower of glass that seemed to scrape the clouds. As they entered the boardroom, executives rose from their seats, murmuring among themselves. Charts filled the screens, profit losses, projections, panic. One man spoke up sharply. Charles, what you announced will destroy us. Giving away free drugs? Price cuts? We'll collapse! Charles didn't flinch. Then we rebuild. This company makes life-saving medicine, not luxury handbags, another executive sneered. You're letting one homeless man dictate corporate policy? Charles turned to Marcus. Tell them what you told me. Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, I didn't do it for money. I did it because I could. Because that man lying on the street was a person, not a price tag. Silence. Then Marcus added, "If your medicine only saves those who can afford it, it's not medicine. It's ransom." The room went still. Even the most cynical executive shifted uncomfortably. Charles smiled. "Exactly. Gentlemen, meet the new director of the Denton Foundation for Veterans Health, Mr. Marcus Reed." Marcus froze. "What? No, Charles placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've led soldiers through fire. You can lead this." The room burst into shocked whispers, but Charles didn't wait for approval. He turned to Marcus. "Your first order of business. Help me dismantle the walls that kept you outside." For the first time in a decade, Marcus felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever: purpose. By nightfall, the internet called it the Reed Initiative. Denton called it something else: the Human Price Project. Under the plan, Denton Pharmaceuticals would open 100 community health centers nationwide. Free care for veterans, free medication for anyone below the poverty line, and no paperwork walls. Stock prices plummeted. Competitors mocked it as suicidal altruism, but out in the streets, people cheered. Nurses brought flowers to Marcus's shelter. Teachers told their students about him. Veterans across the country wrote letters saying, "You gave us back our dignity." One letter stopped him cold. It was from a nurse in Chicago. "Mr. Reed, I'm your son, Caleb. I saw you on TV. I never stopped looking for you. Mom would be proud. Please let me find you." Marcus's vision blurred as he read it. The paper trembled in his hands. After all the years of silence, his son had found him through $9 and a miracle. The next morning, Marcus walked into a VA center, not as a rejected applicant, but as an honored guest. Reporters waited outside as Charles announced the first Denton Foundation partnership. "For too long," Charles said, "our systems have punished the poor for being poor." Marcus Reed reminded us that compassion is not a business expense, it's the cost of being human. He turned to Marcus. "Would you like to say something?" Marcus stepped to the microphone, hands shaking not from fear but emotion. "I'm no saint," he began. "I've been hungry, angry, broken. I've slept under bridges and begged for work. But I learned something out there, that you can lose everything and still not be empty. You still have choice. You can still help." He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Those $9 weren't money. They were proof I still mattered." Applause filled the hall. When it died down, he continued softly, "I didn't just save one man that night. He saved me back. And together, maybe we can save a few more." Weeks turned into months. The Reed Initiative became a nationwide network. Denton's company survived, not because of profit, but because of loyalty. Hospitals preferred their drugs. People trusted them again. The ripple spread. Other corporations followed. Insulin prices dropped. EpiPens became affordable. The impossible started to feel normal. At a small clinic in Newark, a sign on the door read, "Funded by the Reed Initiative, because no life should cost more than $9 inside." A young veteran handed a woman a paper bag containing medicine. She looked confused. "How much do I owe you?" He smiled. "It's already paid for." Meanwhile, Marcus's own life transformed quietly. He moved into a modest apartment near the foundation headquarters. The walls were bare except for a framed photo of Elena and Caleb. One evening, as he was leaving work, a car pulled up outside. The door opened and Caleb stepped out. Taller now, older, with his mother's eyes, they stood frozen for a long moment. Then Marcus said softly, "You grew up?" Caleb's voice shook. "You survived." Marcus pulled him into a hug that seemed to undo 10 years of silence. "I missed too much," he whispered. Caleb smiled through tears. "Then stop missing things. Come home." For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel like he was running. And somewhere deep inside, the memory of that night, the blue lips, the countdown, the $9 clutched in his hand, burned like a reminder of who he truly was. He hadn't bought a miracle. He'd become one. But destiny wasn't done with Marcus Reed yet. Because 1 year later, something would happen that proved the world hadn't just changed for him. It had changed because of him. And the question that had haunted him would finally have an answer. How far can $9 really go? 1 year later, the anniversary of the night that had changed everything arrived quietly. But the city didn't stay quiet for long. Billboards lit up across the skyline, glowing with words that once belonged only to Marcus's thoughts. Your character is your real currency. People called it $9 day now, a day for giving without expecting anything in return. Across America, children were collecting coins in jars labeled Reed Fund. Cafes offered free meals to veterans. Pharmacies dropped prices for one day to the bare minimum. The movement had outgrown its founder. Marcus spent that morning at the Bridge Street Veterans Center, once an abandoned post office, now a place where hundreds of former soldiers received treatment, jobs, and therapy every week. He moved from room to room, greeting people by name. "Morning, Tanya," he said to a nurse bandaging a veteran's arm. "How's the supply shortage?" "Handled," she said proudly. "The Reed shipment came in last night," he smiled. "Good, no one waits for medicine. Not on my watch." When he walked outside, a crowd of journalists waited. One shouted, "Mr. Reed, people are calling this the biggest humanitarian reform since the GI Bill. What's next for you?" Marcus adjusted his worn cap. "Next," he thought for a moment. "Next, we keep proving that decency doesn't need an agenda." The cameras flashed. Behind him, a group of veterans saluted. But later that evening, when the sun dipped below the city towers, Marcus stood alone on a corner that had once been a battlefield for him. The same spot where he'd knelt beside Charles Denton, the man who'd once been dying. The plaque embedded in the sidewalk shimmered in the streetlight. Here, $9 saved a life and reminded the world what one human being can do. People passed by, taking photos, whispering, "That's him." He nodded politely but kept his eyes on the plaque, lost in thought. Then a familiar voice spoke beside him. "You always come back here." Marcus turned. Charles Denton was standing there holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one over. "Figured you'd want the usual." "Black, no sugar," Marcus chuckled. "Still remember." "Hard to forget the man who changed the company I thought I built," Charles said. "We've opened our 200th Foundation Center this week. The next one's in Chicago." "Chicago," Marcus repeated. "That's where Caleb lives." Charles smiled. "Already arranged. You'll be there for the opening." Marcus's voice softened. "You didn't have to do all this." "I did," Charles said simply. "Because you gave me a reason to." They stood together sipping coffee, the night air heavy with memory. "You ever think," Charles asked quietly, "how close it came? How the difference between my life and my death was just $9 and a stranger's decision?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "It wasn't the money. It was the moment. You can have everything and still have nothing to give, or you can have nothing and still give everything." Charles looked away, his voice barely a whisper. "My brother was a Marine. He took his life 4 years ago. If I'd understood then what I understand now, maybe—" Marcus stopped him gently. "You can't rewrite the past, Charles. But you can make the future better for someone else." Charles exhaled. "That's exactly what we're doing." The next day, Marcus boarded a train to Chicago. For the first time in years, he didn't hide his scars under shame. People in the cabin recognized him and nodded respectfully, but he just smiled, humbly uncomfortable with the attention. When the train rolled into the city, banners waved along the station walls. Opening day, Reed Wellness Center for Veterans. Caleb was there waiting. "You're late," he teased, hugging his father tightly. "Trains still don't wait for heroes," Marcus said, laughing. "Good." Caleb grinned. "Because you're not done saving people yet." At the grand opening, cameras flashed, but Marcus ignored them all. He stood on the stage looking out over the crowd. Hundreds of veterans, nurses, and families. He raised the microphone. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I had $9 and a decision to make. I could feed myself or I could help a man who was dying. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what would happen. I just knew it was right." He paused. "I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to stay human in a world that forgets what that means." The audience went silent. "Now look around you," he continued. "Every one of you here is proof that one small act can ripple across millions. I didn't save Charles Denton that night. I saved a piece of all of us, the part that still believes in compassion." Applause thundered. Caleb stood in the front row, tears streaming down his face. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded him again. "Mr. Reed!" "What will you do now?" He smiled softly. "Live, and make sure no one else has to choose between food and mercy." That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Marcus walked through the new center's corridors. Patients rested in clean rooms. Nurses laughed in break areas, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with hope. He stopped in one hallway where a young woman in military uniform was hanging a photograph. "That's a good spot for it," he said. She turned and saluted. "Sir, you don't remember me, do you?" Marcus squinted. "Should I?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "You saved my father in Afghanistan 2010. You patched him up after a blast. He made it home because of you." She held up another photo, a wedding picture. "He walked me down the aisle last month." Marcus's throat tightened. "He made it then?" She nodded. "Because of you. And when I saw what you did for Mr. Denton, I enlisted in the Army Nurse Corps. Now I help save people too." He stared at her for a long moment. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I keep paying it forward." Marcus couldn't find words. The young nurse smiled. "Thank you for reminding us what we're supposed to be." Later that night, Marcus sat alone on a bench outside the center, watching the lights of the city shimmer on the lake. He thought of Elena, of the days when he'd begged for work, of the hunger that had once hollowed him out. He whispered, "I made it, love. I finally made it." The wind carried her voice back. Or maybe it was just memory. "Your character is your real currency," he smiled, closing his eyes. Behind him, on the glass facade of the new building, glowing letters spelled out $9, lit permanently as a beacon. Every night it would shine over the city, a reminder that one man's choice in the dark had set a light in motion across the world. But history wasn't done with Marcus Reed, because the following year, a new crisis would test everything he'd built, and the world would look to him again, not as a symbol but as a leader, and this time, the cost wouldn't be $9, it would be everything. Winter came hard the next year, the kind of cold that cracked skin and silenced laughter. It rolled through the city like punishment, and with it came a new kind of emergency. A new drug, one that could stop a deadly infection spreading through homeless camps, was priced beyond anyone's reach. The headlines screamed about shortages, patents, and corporate greed. The Reed wellness centers were flooded. Lines wrapped around the blocks, veterans coughing in the snow, mothers clutching children who couldn't afford medicine. And even as the foundation worked day and night, Marcus knew the truth. This time, $9 wouldn't be enough. He stood in the headquarters late one night, the city's lights flickering behind him when Charles entered the office. The billionaire looked older now, his confidence replaced with exhaustion. "They've cornered the market," Charles said quietly. "Every dose of the new antibiotic is locked behind exclusive patents. We tried negotiating. They won't sell." Marcus turned slowly. "So people die?" Charles sighed. "They'd rather protect profits than lives." "I know, because that used to be me." Marcus walked to the window. His reflection stared back, older, calmer, but carrying the same spark that had driven him across that street years ago. "Then we find another way," he said. "There isn't one," Charles whispered. Marcus faced him. "There's always one. We just have to be willing to lose what's left." 3 weeks later, the boardroom at Denton Pharmaceuticals erupted in chaos. Executives shouted over one another, accusing Charles of betrayal, Marcus of sabotage. Charles slammed his fist on the table. "Enough, the patents were unjust. We're breaking them." "You can't," one man snapped. "It's illegal." "Then we'll be the first company prosecuted for saving lives," Marcus said, standing beside Charles. The room fell silent. Charles looked around. "We're manufacturing the drug ourselves at cost, for everyone who needs it. Do you realize what you're doing?" An executive hissed. "You'll bankrupt this company." Charles smiled faintly. "Maybe, but we'll bankrupt greed first." The announcement shook the markets. Stocks collapsed overnight. Competitors threatened lawsuits. Politicians demanded hearings. But while the world argued, people began to live. The new drug poured into clinics and shelters for free, saving thousands within weeks. Marcus ignored the chaos on TV. He spent his days in the centers, sleeves rolled up, treating patients, teaching young medics, calming frightened families. Doc Reed, they called him now. But late one evening, Charles came to him with trembling hands. "They're coming after us personally," he said. "Government inquiries, investors pulling out." "I could lose everything," Marcus met his eyes. "You already gave everything that mattered." This is just money." Charles nodded slowly. I suppose you're right, he smiled weakly. You always are. That night, Charles worked until dawn, signing orders, approving shipments, answering press calls. At sunrise, he walked into Marcus's office with 2 cups of coffee. We did it, he said. Every shipment's gone out. Then his smile faltered. He swayed, clutching his chest. The coffee fell, shattering across the floor. Charles. Marcus caught him as he collapsed. Stay with me, come on! But there were no EpiPens this time. No miracles bought with loose bills. Just the sound of a friend slipping away in the same building they'd built to heal others. Charles Denton died that morning from a sudden heart attack. The world mourned a billionaire turned reformer. Marcus mourned a brother. At the memorial, Marcus spoke last. Cameras flashed, but his eyes stayed fixed on the casket. Charles spent his life chasing power, he said quietly, and found purpose instead. He used his last years to fix what men like him and men like me helped break. And if you ask me, that's the only kind of redemption that matters. He looked up at the crowd of executives, nurses, veterans, and strangers. I once had $9 and a choice to make. I thought I was saving one man. But he saved millions. That's the power of a single decision. The silence that followed was heavy, reverent. After the service, a young journalist approached him. Mr. Reed, she asked, do you think what you did can last without him? Marcus smiled faintly. It was never about him, or me. It was about remembering that we can be better, and refusing to forget it again. Years passed. The world changed quietly. Medicine became accessible. Homeless veterans dwindled. Hospitals named wings after him. Universities taught his story as the turning point of modern ethics. But Marcus Reed still lived simply. No mansion, no luxury car. Just a small apartment with a view of the city lights and a wall covered with letters, handwritten thank yous from people he'd never met. Every year on the same night, he returned to that corner on Liberty Street. He'd sit beside the plaque, now surrounded by flowers and candles, and think of the man gasping for air, the woman who'd sold him the injector, the boy he'd raised, the friend he'd buried. One evening, a young man in a torn jacket approached him. Excuse me, he said nervously. Are you Marcus Reed? Marcus nodded. The young man opened his palm, revealing 9 crumpled bills. This is all I have, he said. But I heard what you did. I want to help someone else. How do I start? Marcus stared at the money for a long moment, then gently closed the young man's hand around it. You already have, he said. Just keep it moving. The world's still catching up. The young man smiled through tears and walked away into the night. Marcus watched him disappear into the crowd. The city hummed around him, alive and imperfect, but healing. He whispered into the air, It's your turn now. A breeze stirred the candles at his feet, and for a second the plaque's reflection shimmered like gold. It read, Here. A man with $9 reminded the world that compassion is priceless. Marcus leaned back, smiling faintly. The city lights glowed above him. Somewhere he imagined Charles laughing, Elena smiling, and Caleb waiting at home. He closed his eyes not from exhaustion, but peace, because the world finally understood what he'd been trying to say all along. You don't need wealth to create miracles. You just need the courage to care. And that night, as the streetlights flickered, the letters above the Denton Foundation building lit up again, brighter than ever. 9 forever. The light stretched across the skyline like a promise, and the world, watching from its windows and screens, believed it. Because one man's kindness had become a movement. One act had become a revolution, and one heart had proved that even in the coldest world, warmth is still possible. The $9 miracle never ended. It simply began again.